I made up a little story a year or so ago, which has no historical grounding that I'm aware of at all. But here's this makes sense for me. So you're Isaac Newton, and you've been working on alchemy for like 40 years, and it's just this god awful, confusing mess of stuff, and you never know what's going on. And one day you think, nuts, I'm going to invent physics. So you invent the calculus, you pick a few variables, and you create modern science. And then, whoosh, well, boy, okay, now I better get back to the hard work. And you turn back to alchemy because that's hard. But physics is pretty straightforward because the rules are so simple. And you pick three or four variables and you're done. But it's the same imaginative process. It's just the rules are different.
You were talking about Rilke. There is a letter. I'm not sure whether it's in Letters to a Young Poet or another letter. And I don't remember the time period either, but in one of his letters, Rilke talks of the impersonal or the suprapersonal in terms of a melody. I don't know whether you remember that. He says, he writes the letter and he says, what I'm going to tell you now rivals in significance a religion. That's Rilke saying that. That's what he's about to convey rivals a religion in significance. And then he says, I'm going to paraphrase, I can't remember exactly, but he says, if you find the underlying melody of your life, very Schopenhauerian, the rhythm, rhyme, and flow, if you find the underlying melody of your life, then you can bear anything. Because the struggle for deciding, finding direction, what you have to do and what it's all about, all that struggle disappears. You just ride the melody of your life.
Thank you so very much for showing up, and I'm very honored and privileged. Feel very honored and privileged, and I'm very glad that you two meet. I understand that's your first meeting, albeit virtual.
This is our first meeting. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I also feel very privileged and honored today.
Well, me too. You guys both kind of scare me.
So let us just I'll kick the ball off, and then the plan is to leave you talk and keep out of the picture, but keep myself out of the picture, but. As a sort of starting point, I explained it, Tom, already earlier, that the preliminaries of this meeting today take us back to I think I conversed with you, Bernardo, in November 2023. It was.
It could be.
And the interview appeared in the January issue of a newspaper. And we were talking about your book on Jung and metaphysics, and inevitably, the talk kind of veered or moved into the imagination, and then you dropped the sentence that kind of stuck with me, and you said that the most criminally underrated thought system in the whole world is a Sufi philosophy of imagination. And if you want to read about it, I'll recommend you the book by Tom Cheetham, All the World an Icon.
Yeah, it's the most annotated book I have. It's like every single page. If I find it quickly, I can show it to you.
That's right. I'm glad you liked it.
I can't find it quickly. But never mind. Trust me, it is in shambles. It's falling apart by now.
And then I wrote to Tom, and Tom kindly answered, and we had a conversation on that book, so just first I'd like you to, Bernardo, to unpack this very sentence. Why is the Sufi theory of imagination the most underrated thought system?
I think it goes back to Shiite classical philosophy in general. I think the reason is that we in the West, at least since the Enlightenment, probably even since the Renaissance, we have sort of reified one particular psychic function, which is the intellect, reasoning. Even empiricism is sort of based on the intellect because you make logical comparisons between observations and theories. So it's all intellect stuff. We didn't completely lose touch with intuition. You see that in the culture at large still. You see that in religious intuition. We didn't lose touch completely with introspection. You see that undergoing a renaissance right now. But we don't take the imagination seriously. Imagination has become synonymous with fantasy, with self-deception, self-construction, with no ontic value whatsoever. So you very often hear parents, when a child wakes up from a nightmare at night, a parent will sit next to the child and say, "Don't you worry, it was just a dream." That, just a dream. And the meaning of that, which the child registers, I registered, it is the imagination does not count. It just doesn't count. And then you have a whole philosophical tradition in Shiite Islam, in old-time Persia and Iran today, in which a lot of emphasis was placed on the imagination. Like I got to know Henri Corbin via the work of Tom, because Tom is the guy who sort of digested Henri Corbin for mortals like you and me, Ardo. And I was delighted. I mean, it's like every passage Tom quoted from classic Islamic texts. I was like, my God, yes, this is it. And I thought, this is the main quote. And then I flip one page and then, no, this now is the main thing. And every page was like this. At the end, the book was twice as thick, all folded up, all annotated. So yeah, it made quite an impression in me. It was a friend of mine who gave me that book, Rick, who is a retired psychologist. And he correctly predicted that it would open a whole other door, a whole other wing in the palace of my mind if I read that. And it was correct.
Please,
okay.
Tom.
It's super synchronous that you mention childhood dreams. Because I've been giving that a lot of thought lately, and that in my own life. I mean, I don't know how seriously to take my little fantasy here, but I like all children. I had these horrible dreams, and I was told exactly that. I mean, yeah, we won't go into it, but that really screws you up, man. if the most intense and important experience in your very young life is just not
Nothing.
real,
yeah,
then screw the whole thing.
yeah.
I mean, what the heck? That
Yeah.
doesn't leave you with much. And so there's got to be something wrong there. And just to tie this up in a little narrative for me, many, many, many years later, in fact, I was 38 years old. That's when I first encountered James Hillman's work. And he was the one that had that effect on me. When I started reading him, I just thought, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for all my life, because he put imagination right at the center of everything. And even more so than Jung, in the sense that Hillman didn't care about science.
Yeah.
That's fine. And so he wasn't as ambivalent as Jung sometimes is. And then it was Hillman who eventually pointed me towards Henri Corbin, and then it's been a long rabbit hole since then.
I was very influenced by Hillman as well. Archetypal psychology. And my mindset, Tom, is more along Jung's mindset. So I'm inclined to interpret. And Hillman was like, well, you don't need to interpret. The thing is already speaking to you at another level, at an emotional level. Take it as it comes. Take it for what it is. It's the imagery. Let it enter you. Let it impact you. You don't need to interpret it and come out with a nice, neat narrative. I have the proclivity for the narratives. So I admire Hillman a lot. And I have a tinge of jealousy because I don't have that ability to sort of just take it as it is, take it as it comes, set yourself open to it. I have difficulty with that.
Yeah, well, so do I, and I've been spending maybe 70 years trying to just let those things go. And you know, I mean, you can't. One of the things that Hillman said that was most important to me, and I'd spent several. Yeah, I was either interested in philosophy or in natural science, and both of those are intellectual disciplines, or at least they certainly can be, and they are manifestations of what Hillman called spirit, but he meant lots of things by spirit. And what he said was, well, you know, philosophy, the sciences, and theology, they're all spirit in the sense that they like to literalize. And then he says, well, of course, you know, the literalism is just another form of imagination.
Mm.
And the first few times I read that, I thought, I know what he means by that, but that's very disturbing.
Yeah, it is.
You know,
Yeah.
and man, it's taken me a really long time to begin to take that seriously, but maybe not literally. You know, because these are psychological, that is to say, in Corbin's terms, they are psychocosmological problems.
Could you, I mean, for my own benefit as well, but I'll pretend that I know it all and it's for the benefit of the audience. Could you give us a quick overview of the philosophy of the imagination as interpreted by Corbin, but also by yourself as you read the original text, just to give us a sense, a taste of what it is? What is the ethos, the sort of psychological attitude towards it that people have?
I mean, this becomes that's a great question. What great question. Um, and there's the response to that. Here's one of the things that I've learned is that it's really hard to articulate that because it is so fundamental. And so it depends, and I'll try not to just say it depends, but it depends very much on who you're talking to and what kind of experience of the world they're currently stuck in. So if you're in a room full of engineers and you want to explain this to them, that's one set of very difficult problems. If you're talking to poets and writers and artists, then you have another set of problems.
Yeah.
And but in both cases, you have you have a problem of bridging gaps, you know. But here you go. So my reading of Corbin has changed over the years quite a lot. Every time I come to him, it looks a little different, depending on where I'm coming from. I mean, and that's part of the deal here. And Corbin's quite clear about that if you read him closely, that it really does matter who and how you are in the moment as to what ideas you can actually live. I mean, you can be abstract in all sorts of ways. As for instance, when I first read Hillman's sentence that literalizing is just a mode of imagining, and I had that in an abstract sense, but I knew damn well that I couldn't live it. What would that even mean? You know, um, so Corbin is a little peculiar in that I think he's not always entirely consistent. Sometimes in himself, or at least in the audience, he's assuming they're post-Enlightenment Europeans. Other times, he's talking to a different audience without the same assumptions. Um, but for most people in the modern world, the real catch is like the existence of rocks. I mean, that was the first thing that struck me, and I could say a million things about my own history, but there's a certainly what Corbin means by imagination is not what we usually mean. And the one way of entering into his world is through the religions of the book. If you're willing or if that's the way he grew up, if you're willing to allow a theological argument in, and many people are not, in which case you got to back up and start again. But if you're willing to take a theological argument, even as just literature or poetry, what you say is that, well, God created everything and he was, imagining it. That's and what we have as imagination in us is just a tiny little sliver of the divine creative imagination. So, but we're not very good at it. So that when we imagine a rock, it doesn't just appear in front of us on the desk. But when we imagine a computer, if we spend the requisite number of years to learn how to make one, we can actually make stuff out of stuff, and that apparent dualism between the fuzzy stuff in your brain that we call imagination and real things, from Ibn Arabi's point of view, he can say, well, sure, there's imagination and then there's stuff, but from another point of view, everything is imagination. What does Ibn Arabi say? He says, well, imagination is this in-between thing. It's in between different kinds of being. And then this is where Corbin gets the imaginal realm. It's between the stuff down here and the divine. So the imaginal realm is in between. But then if you read Corbin reading Ibn Arabi says, well, from another point of view, because everything is in between something and something else, everything's imagination. And so we need a better word than imagination, because we don't have a word that splits the difference between matter and what we call mind. And both of those concepts, we gotta think of, or not think. I mean, that's the problem. We have to intuit. When you started talking, you mentioned intuition, and because I'm forever wondering how to talk about imagination, well, intuition would be part of it, but it's got to be partly sensation, partly intuition, partly thinking, and what's the other one? It's got to be some, and it's not a human faculty. It's a part of the world. There's and which then immediately falls apart into pieces because that's how we see things. But what Corbin's trying to get to is this fundamentally, it's a creative spark which bridges the gaps between all the dualisms that split the West, as he would say it.
So it's non-dual. It's a monism of sorts.
Yeah, and that's yes. But I don't want to go on too long, but one of the neat things all right. So I have an allergy to monism, which is my own psychological problem. All right. And when people talk about God or the one, I mean, I know Jung calls it it doesn't call it psychological, but monism. You know, we've got a mental monism, and I'm really allergic to that. And so you've got the problem here, which Corbin solves very neatly, of being a pluralist, and yet there's a fundamental coherence, a sort of the metaphors that work one set of metaphors that work nicely here are alchemical metaphors. And one of the things that enchanted me about Corbin right at the beginning is his enthusiasm for the world of plural images. Okay, so all I'm saying is that don't say monism or it makes me nervous.
There can be diversity in unity. I mean, if everything at root is unity, it doesn't mean that everything is flat and single-sided. All kinds of dualisms can exist within an underlying monism in a sense, at least analytically speaking. You can make conceptual sense of that. But, Jung had this notion of active imagination, which for him was not just fantasy. Active imagination was a form of perception in which the imagery is co-created by you, but modulated by something else that is communicating to you via that imagery that arises within you. So there is a sort of an external modulation of the imagination, which conveys a message, therefore active imagination. Would you see the imaginal as like that? I mean, it's not fantasy that we self-create. It's a kind of a direct form of perception that uses the faculty of imagination.
Yeah. You would think that I'd have all my answers laid out after like 35 years of reading Corbin and thinking hard about this stuff. But I guess what's glorious about it is that every time you think about it, it's like, wow, this is really neat. So here's where when you think about this stuff, you're in the realm of the arts, because of creative imagination, and there's some. Let's just set aside imagination in the natural sciences and engineering, because they're a kind of special case and they fit here. Trust me, at least I think they do. But it's harder to see what's going on there because we're so close to the literal. And also because the rules have gotten under our skin.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think about this a lot, and I don't have a really good way of contrasting creativity, and you may as well push it all the way in the engineering world versus imaginal creativity in literature or the arts, or in theology for that matter. And it's harder to see it in engineering, that is the creative imagination, because the nature of the substances require more stable rules. You
Yeah.
don't want your bridge to fall down.
Yeah.
One way I made up a little story a year or so ago, which has no historical grounding that I'm aware of at all. But this makes sense for me. So you're Isaac Newton, and you've been working on alchemy for like 40 years, and it's just this god awful, confusing mess of stuff, and you never know what's going on. And one day you think, nuts, I'm going to invent physics. So you invent the calculus, you pick a few variables, and you create modern science. And then, whoosh, well, boy, okay, now I better get back to the hard work. And you turn back to alchemy because that's hard. But physics is pretty straightforward because the rules are so simple, and you pick 3 or 4 variables and you're done, But it's the same imaginative process. It's just the rules are different. And they need to be, and let's not go there because that becomes theological, as physicists usually do. In the world of the arts, the active imagination is, and look, one of the points that I try to get across to myself all the time is that I think the way you have to read Henri Corbin is as if there's a continuum between little old you and what Corbin's talking about. He's talking about Ibn Arabi and Mullah Sadra and Shuravardi, and these are some of the premier mystics of humanity. And Corbin himself was something of a mystic, and I'm not. And in order, I think, to make Corbin relevant to me, I've got to at least pretend that what he's talking about with his angels and all this stuff, that there are analogies down here in my little world of coffee cups and people, and so I assume that there's a continuum of processes. So my experience of creative imagination, well, it happens when I draw or when I write a little poetry. And it's in those little moments that I think you can begin to see what Jung was talking about. And of course, Jung's a fantastic example. We now have the Red Book, which he was, that's not art, he says. Well, yeah, it is. It's totally art.
Yeah.
He didn't want to say it was art, because I'm not quite sure why, but so here's my experience of creative imagination. You're writing a line of a poem, and you're going for the next word, and then you look for a word, and you write one down, you think, no. Then you write another one, no. And then you get, oh, that's it. And then next word. Well, where did that come from?
Yeah.
You didn't make it up. I mean, kind of you did. But why did you know that that was the right word? Well, because, I don't know, it was. And it's that, is that creation or discovery? And when you find the right word, it's a discovery.
Yeah.
But no, it was a creation. Oh, shit. It's a little bit of both. And then if you blow that up, you get to the central story in his book on Ibn Arabi, which is when you pray to your Lord, you're creating your Lord, which the first time you read it, you think, what? And after a couple of decades, you realize, oh, it's a process of co-creation. I only am because you are, and vice versa. And that's just this, metaphysically enormous, divine example of finding the right word in a poem or finding the right brushstroke in a painting. And I think there has to be some sort of continuity there of instances where you both discover and create.
I can share something with you. It's my own experience for what it's worth. It's not, I'm not promulgating any philosophical position here. It's just how I feel. Most people around me think I'm very highly creative because I've written 12 books and number of patents and all kinds of engineer. I'm an engineer too, and I'm not only a philosopher. I have a doctorate in computer engineering as well. And right now I just founded an AI company. So I'm in the midst of a very creative process in the books and everything I've done in the past. And people think I'm very creative. I will confess to you, the older I get, the clearer it becomes to me. And this is a very unbalanced point of view. You try to get across something that is balanced. There's a co-creation. But the feeling I have is that I've never created anything of value, at least, that whenever I tried to create something, it doesn't work. It's flat. And and everything, every word in books, every idea in my books, every patent that I came up, every idea, every technical idea I've come up with. I mean, this happened like twice this week. So it's a constant experience for me. It feels like I just saw it, or that it just landed right in front of my nose, and I didn't ask. I didn't trigger it. It's like I didn't press a button to make it happen. It has its own terms, if you know what I mean. And there was a time in my life when I realized this. This was years ago. I became very anxious because I realized that I had no control over this process, and yet my whole professional life depended on it. And I realized I never made it happen. I cannot make it happen. It happens on its own terms. And I thought, what if it stops tomorrow? What will I do? Right? I have always been well paid because of this externally perceived creativity that doesn't quite exist, and was never really there. Now I turned 50 last year, and I developed a kind of faith, trust, like it has always happened. Why will it stop? Just relax, give yourself to it, and it probably will happen. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't. You know what I mean? But I never had the feeling that I created anything. And maybe that's not psychologically balanced. I did therapy for several years, also because of tinnitus. But of course, when you're doing therapy, conversations sort of branch out into other things that are important to you. And I mentioned this to my therapist, like, I don't feel I ever create anything. It just lands in front of me when it decides to. And then he asked me, does it make you feel bad? Does it make you feel small? And I realized that there was a time in which it did. I mean, when I was very young, I thought I was creating it. You're just stupid when you're young, right? You don't realize that you're not doing anything. You're not in control of anything. But when you're young, you think you are. And then when you are a younger adult, like in your mid-30s, then you feel small upon that realization. I felt. Now I don't. Because maybe now it does not matter. The question does not matter, if you know what I mean. It's not like I don't feel small. It's like, what the hell is this question, right? I'm a part of nature. I'm integrated in this whole web of things. It doesn't matter what's small, what is big. What matters is how the web is working. So I relaxed into this flow of the imaginal, if I can put it that way. And I think you helped me a lot, and Patrick Harper helped me a lot as well, making sense of this.
Yeah, I love that, and it really mirrors my experiences. And I'll just pick the books. I didn't understand what was going on for a long time, but the early there's only 5. I didn't do 12. I did 5. But the first one I needed to write because I was deeply confused about Corbin, and so I sat down to sort of organize it. So there was a lot of me in that, I guess. I mean, maybe that was Well, it wasn't creative. It was more like playing with Legos. I mean, where do all these pieces go? You know, and so that I wrote that. But then the rest of them were utterly compelled.
Yeah,
I
I
did
know
not,
that feeling.
you
Yeah,
will know that feeling.
yeah.
I do not have any choice. And then it was very puzzling for many years as I kept writing these books. People would say what's in them, and I have no idea, you know. And well, could you talk about this? No. um, and I was genuinely really puzzled about that. And because because it wasn't me. I didn't write them. They were being written by me. And when I was done with them, I was done. And now I go back on very rare occasions to look at them. I just did that today because I got class later on, and I thought, oh, I think I could go find that in my book. And I was reading, and I thought, this is pretty good.
I exactly my experience.
You know?
Who
Yeah,
wrote
and
this?
it's very annoying. Oh God, I was at some event and the guy brought out four of my books and he says, "Well, let's summarize this one," and I just had to make stuff up. I had no idea.
I totally understand that. I have the exact, I have two friends, my closest friends. Every now and then they look at me when I'm behaving in a way that is immature or having an anxiety that is silly, you know, something like that. They're both older than me by 15 years. Every now and then they look at me, pause, and they say, Bernardo, you should read your books.
Yes. Oh, that's so embarrassing. Yeah. You should definitely read your books. Oh, well, here's an interesting thing. And maybe, yeah, this you might, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this seemed right to you. Um, all of those books were aspirational. Someone pointed that word out to me the other day because I was trying to articulate that. This is where I want to be. And you're writing yourself forward. And it's not really, to call it an intellectual process means the wrong thing to most people, except for I don't know, the kind of people that write books like that. Because it's not, I mean, it's more emotional and intuitional than it is intellectual. I mean, you don't give a shit about the intellectual part. You want to be where you would be if you saw these things clearly, which you only see dimly now. And the point that I want to make is that I haven't written anything to speak of for a long time because I don't have the compulsions anymore, which is good, except it means I'm not writing anything. But what I think is happening is I'm catching up to myself. You know, I threw all this stuff out ahead of me, which I could sort of see with the help of, Hillman and Corbin and these others. I could see it, but I wasn't there. And now I'm kind of catching up.
I,
And that's lovely.
when I read All the World and Icon, I read it just when it came out. I think it was 2012, many years ago. I went on the internet and I did a Google search on you. And I don't know whether it's the first hit, was a first hit, or would still be the first hit, but I watched, I think it was an interview or a talk you gave, but you were an overt materialist in that talk, like a total denier of the imagination. And then I realized your books are daimonic in the sense of Patrick Harpur, and they're written through you, just like mine are. I never wrote a book in my life. I hate writing books, and I can't writing books. I can't write books, but I reconciled my intellectual persona with what comes through me because it's part of the deal. It's part of what I'm compelled to do. And if I don't do that, my anxiety just explodes and I would torture myself and probably not leave bed in the morning. So I acquiesce to that force, and I constructed this nice analytic philosopher persona that is very consistent with what is written because it's part of the deal. It's part of what is expected, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But your books, it was very clear to me. They are daimonic. And the epistemology in your books is not linear. It's not the analytic epistemology in which you start with your axioms and your assumptions, and then you list your rules of derivation, and then you start arriving at conclusions in a linear sequence. No, your book is a result of circumambulation. It's an exercise in circumambulation. It's the Jungian epistemology, right? Which is the true epistemology. It's not from A here to B here. It's like the goal is in the center and you go around it. It's like a spiral. Every turn around it, you look at it from a slightly different slant, a slightly different perspective, from a slightly different context. And then you go back and you keep on returning. That's how you write. And then, of course, if somebody like me, an idiot like me, comes during a online discussion and ask you, can you please summarize the philosophy of the imagination? And of course, I'm asking you to go from A to B, which is precisely the point that you don't want to do that, because that's not, how to say, it doesn't honor the content. It doesn't honor the message.
So, I mean, it's delightful that the book, people say nice things about the books, which is great. So that's
They're wonderful books.
So I'm told. I don't know what's in them, but here's the interesting point. I have the same experience while reading Hillman, but particularly Corbin, that in order to understand Corbin, and it's probably the same for Hillman, but let's just stick with Corbin. You can't do it from outside. You've got to be in it, and it's kind of hard to get in there. Coming from Enlightenment rationalism of a materialist, it's really hard to get in there. So you either don't get it or you're in there.
Yeah.
And once you're in there, it's an associational universe. There's no straight lines. And so that's part of the explanation for why every time I teach Corbin, things look a little different, because you came in at a slightly different door. Oh, look at all these things, so it's alchemical in that sense, in that it's associational. It's an associational display of realities which are simply not laid out in normal time and space. And the connections are not intellectual. They're anything. They could be sensory or intuitional or personal, and so it's what makes it so super interesting. And just one thing to say. I mean, this is wonderful confirmation for me of two things that occurred to me, and I don't know if this will make sense, but I first just learned that there were different different experiences of reality from my history professor, Ed Krantz, who shows up in most of my books. And he was arguing back in the early 70s, and he was pretty unusual then, but not anymore, that, the ancient Greeks' experience of reality was really wildly different than ours. And he did it by hermeneutics. He did it by reading the ancient Greek texts. And he said to me once, and it flipped me out when I was 19 years old, he said, I can sometimes kind of get in their heads, and sometimes, he said, I'm afraid I won't be able to get back. And that really weirded me out. Now I see it as the kind of strange state that poets and artists and other creative types sometimes get in, and you're experiencing reality in a way which is not shared by the majority of your colleagues, and that can be pretty unsettling ontologically and psychologically. And then the other marker for me is Ivan Illich, who just never disappears from my head. And somewhere in one of his incredible conversations with David Cayley, he said, the modern West is the only civilization that I am aware of, and he was aware of a lot, in which there isn't a correspondence between what's here and what's elsewhere. Well, it's that world of correspondences that is where these analogies come from. I mean, and I think that it's a mistake to think of them as let me have two ideas here and then I'll stop. I think it's a mistake to think of these things as Corbin seems to, which is vertically hierarchical. Here's another ahistorical story. If Ibn Arabi had known about complex systems theory or modern mathematics, he would have said, "Oh, that's wonderful. Now I don't have to talk about vertical hierarchies. I have n dimensions, you know? I mean, it just seems to me this whole hierarchical cosmos thing with the angels in their 10, that's just because they didn't know about modern mathematics, you know? So if they'd had complex systems theory, they'd have loved it.
Are you familiar with Swedenborg?
Not as familiar as I should be, because he's crazy.
He's completely crazy.
He's completely crazy, and I know that Corbin has a real sweet spot for Swedenborg.
Because Swedenborg talks about these correspondences, which are more than analogies; they are appearances. It's like the spiritual realm appears in the material realm in the form of matter. So there is a hermeneutics of the world, which sort of latches on with the title of the book we are talking about. All the World an Icon suggests that you can interpret the world, that the world is not the thing in itself. It points at something else, just like the iconography of religion points at something else. Everything is a symbol, right? And then there is a hermeneutics of the world, and the hermeneutics is grounded in these correspondences. So, and Swedenborg, he wrote like a dozen books just listing the correspondences and what they correspond to. It's like it's a very big trip, and but then, the correspondences are supposed to mean that material forms and dynamics correspond to stuff in the spiritual realm. But then he goes and describes the spiritual realm, and in his description, the spiritual realm is just like this one. There are forms and dynamics and people and landscapes and houses and all of that, which creates this codependency that you're talking about. Because if the thing that is meant, that appears as a correspondence, itself looks like the correspondences, it's like there is no hierarchy here. You just created a web with the re-entrant loops. So yeah, but I agree with you. Swedenborg is certifiable. But to some extent, that's what makes him delightful. I mean, and Kant is on record saying he's certifiable, but he couldn't let him go. He was interested.
Yeah. Corbin was very fond of Swedenborg for I think, for all those reasons. And this is of interest, I think, to other folks here. Last year or the year before, I forget how I discovered her work, but there's a writer, and I think she's also an artist, but at least she's in the art world, called Kaya Silverman. And she's written a ton of, some of her writings, she's writing on photography now, and it's just really amazing. But the book that I read, and we did a class on it, is called Flesh of My Flesh. And there's a lot of just stunning ideas in there. But one of her grounding ideas is that, and this is no surprise, that analogy is, well, she actually says analogy will save us. And I'm not quite sure exactly what she means, but from my point of view, that was pure Corbin. Whether it's analogy or correspondence, however you want to talk about the structure of reality, that's how you move around in Corbin's world or the world of alchemy or Jung's world. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not linear, it's complicated. Um, one thing, huh, but it's a big thing, is that it's really, really hard not to carry our presuppositions with us when we enter these worlds. I mean, that's for me too, because I mean, you were just saying, and this is one of the things that can be annoying to me about Swedenborg, is he tells you what he's seeing as if when you get there, you'll see these things too. And that's literalizing, you
Mm.
know? And I think Corbin manages to avoid that. It's one of the things that makes him such a frustration to read because being a Gnostic, he assumes, well, he behaves as if he assumes that what you see is what you see, and what somebody else sees, that's what they're going to see. And the frustration is, okay, you've seen these things, tell me how to do it.
Yeah.
And he says, no, I can't do that. That would be institutional religion. I don't do that because institutional religion will point you in a direction, and that's okay, but don't follow it too far because then they'll tell you who God is and what you're supposed to do and all these
Yeah.
other things. And so all the structures of common society and history don't work so well at the high end here. And so one of those sliding scales is really problematic because you need to have consensus reality when you need it. And then
Yeah.
you need to be able to let go of it in those
Yeah.
circumstances where it only stands in your way. And I don't think we have any way to talk about navigating that transition.
Certainly not in a culturally endorsed manner. I've struggled with this question as well because I'm not good at a mystical experience. It doesn't seem to happen to me. I'm very hard-headed. Even when I did psychedelics in my 30s, I had to have pretty high doses and other things involved in order to get somewhere. But reading your book, I had this feeling, if only I could enter the world of these philosophers you're talking about. If I could only see through their eyes, experience the world and reality through their minds, what would it be like? I mean, where does somebody need to stand to write that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
which is so alive? Um, the word that comes to me, colorful and alive, very alive, much more alive than this world we see around us. And then I started looking, and it's a process that took years. I started trying to find what is the closest thing in my own life? What is the closest avenue that is familiar to me? And what I realized, and now Hardo, that will speak to, you're in Tampere, right? You're in the south.
No, I'm in Estonia.
Oh, you're in Estonia. I thought you were
Yeah,
in Finland.
yeah,
Okay, but even more to the south.
yeah, even more.
But if you go to the north of Scandinavia, north of Norway, north of Finland, and beyond Oulu, um, there is a certain living mythology there. Um, but it's not just Thor and his fits of rage and lightning. No. There is something very palpable, very present that people there almost take for granted. And I have spent winters in the north of Scandinavia, and I find it very attractive. I mean, it's what triggers suicide amongst the locals, but I find it very attractive to spend the winter there because it's always dark. You can see the horizon becoming slightly orange, and then it's dark again. That's all you get. There's a little glow in the horizon, and that's it. You start taking the moon for the sun. It plays the same role in your life. And the light is very different. I mean, usually it's snowed out. So the light of the moon and the stars, which with a bluish hue, reflects on everything. And the yellow lights of houses, it starts looking like Christmas trees. Yeah. And everything, and the air is so pure, so oxygen rich, so absolutely pure. There is a certain sharpness to it, and everything becomes sharp. Your pupils dilate. At the same time, it's always night. So there is a way in which looking outward becomes looking inward.
Oh, that's great.
See what I mean?
Yeah, that is wonderful.
And I went to the point of sleeping out in a tent at night. And then and the only yellow light, the only warmth you have in terms of color and warmth is fire. You know, you make a campfire. And that's the closest I entered that world, because when you are there, suddenly I can't explain to you in analytic terms or in rational terms why I'm going to say what I'm going to say. Suddenly, Nordic mythology makes sense. It's not abstract. It's not like I saw fairies. No, I didn't. But it gets close. I don't know how to explain this to you. It's like, I understand, you know, even though I didn't see it, and I understand where that came from. What is the mindset that leads to that? It's the closest I can get. Last time I did it, it was just when the pandemic was beginning. It was in the winter of 2019 to 2020. Very far north in Finland, well into the Arctic Circle. And it is magical in a certain way. I mean, if you can take cold of minus 25 degrees Celsius, it's magical. Right. You know, I don't have a problem with cold. I have a problem with heat. Heat just kills me.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether you can resonate with this. If you do, maybe it's an idea for a trip.
No, I resonate more than that is it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, it's cold where I am, but here, I mean, this is the coast of Maine, and that's actually a lighthouse. And one of the features of the coast of Maine, particularly in the winter, is all the fog. You know, you can go. We don't have it where I actually live, but I love those foggy days because they're just so mysterious, and it's like having I have the same experience of fog that you're kind of describing there, where it's night all the time. Because what is my consciousness like? It's like it's like moving through the fog all the time, you know. And so here's a really good mirror of the inside being outside. And of course, that notion of the world turned inside out, I think, is crucial to Corbin's analysis of spiritual development and the blurring and the eradication of that boundary that I at least grew up with. And to go back to the original story, you know, when you wake up or come out of an extraordinarily impressive dream when you're a child and they say, oh, no, it's not real. Oh.
It's cruel almost.
Yeah, no, it is. It's cruel and it's destructive. And insofar as you let that work on you, then you're not going to be able to have that experience of northern Norway or you know, or of the fog, because the fog needs to go away and you need to turn the lights up. Because you know, all that stuff from inside, there's nothing. We don't pay attention to that. So you started that, and I will never forget that. That's a fantastic tale of landscape being transformative. That's great. And I'll tell my students about that this afternoon. But one of the things I was going to say, because you started by saying, where do you stand? Where do you go? What do you do in order to foster this, I don't know, transparency of reality, or the permeability between inside and outside? Three things. First, the arts, in general, because that's usually where I point people, because you can't say, go have a mystic experience, but you can say, go write a poem, or there's two things that are, I think, really potentially useful. One, I've known for a long, long time, and that's just music. And music is super important for Corbin. He actually was a keyboard player. He played the organ. And when, Plato gets confused and says, well, I have to tell a myth. When Corbin runs out of words, he says, well, it's harmony. His fundamental metaphors are all musical. And I think that's just incredibly important. But I was telling Harder earlier, we've been reading Immanuel Cocha lately. Do you know his name?
Emmanuel?
Immanuel Cocha, Coccia. He's an Italian-French philosopher who you should read. I mean, he's really quite astonishing. Anyway, in the context of reading that book, he talks about the domestic in a profoundly interesting way. And one of the things that occurs to me is that music and food, as philosophically and psycho-spiritually active constituents of reality. I mean, you could talk about both of those things forever and ever and ever. But I think properly experienced, which is a goofy thing to say, but important, because mostly we don't properly, at least in the United States, we don't experience food very properly. At least most people don't. And music, that's easier for most people. But where are we most permeable? Music and food. It's the world and its sounds passing through us and being constructive of us. Anyway.
Schopenhauer, wrote about the will being the thing in itself. In other words, endogenous experiential states being the world as it is, and matter being a representation of the will. In other words, how the will presents itself to our observation. And Kant always said that, you can never access the noumenal, you can never access the thing in itself. All you have is the representations or the phenomena, and the noumenal is forever a mystery. And Schopenhauer thought that was wrong, because we can access the noumenal in us. We also exist, right? So at least when it comes to us, we can access the noumenal. And then he tried to make inferences about the noumenal out there, the world out there. All the world an icon. The icons are the representations, but what is it that lies behind the representations? And he said that the closest we can get is by listening to music.
Yeah.
And the argument was that music is a mystery, right? We don't know why certain combinations of notes and rhythms work and others are dissonant. Why? I mean, why certain proportions are pleasant and others are tremendously irritating? Why one is likable, the other one is not? What kind of evolutionary drive there was for us to have this very clear, general sense for what combinations of tones make sense and which and what doesn't? Schopenhauer thought that the reason for that is that the world, as it is in itself, has its own rhyme and rhythm. And when music resonates with that, then we find it pleasant. And that's why music is what it is. That's why certain combinations of notes are agreeable and others are not, because the ones that are agreeable are actually reflect the rhyme, rhythm, and flow of the world as it actually is. It's musical. Life is musical. History is musical. Things come together through rhyme and rhythm, which is a completely different way of looking at history. You know, it's like synchronicity. It's orthogonal to causality.
Yeah. Okay. I have a book for you, Bernardo. Uh, it's maybe you know of it. It's by a fellow named Stefan Alexander, and it's called The Jazz of Physics.
Yes, Stefan. Yeah, I know him. Yeah, that's a fantastic book. Yeah.
that book, just as much as anything I've ever read,
It is
book
delightful.
just floored me. Because, late in life, it brought together. I mean, when I was really young, I wanted to be a theoretical physicist, and I just don't have the mathematical chops for that. So it didn't happen. But I still want to be a theoretical physicist. And Stefan, named that book. I mean, this may or may not be true, but this was what I remember. One of the things from that book. He says, there's there's structures in jazz which are analogous to structures in certain branches of quantum mechanics, and he does a lot with that. And I was so excited when I read that. And then beautifully he says, well, the interesting thing, the creative thing happens when the structures don't quite match. And that's where magic happens. I mean, what? I mean, that's just
he's a rare person, because for somebody to be born with the dispositions that are required to do theoretical physics, but also with the sense of rhythm and swing from the Caribbean that he has. It's like it's a unique combination, that guy. And he's an idealist, by the way. And yeah, I am with you there. Somebody like him is not born every day. It's people we have to treasure almost as like cultural treasures,
Tell him I loved his books, man. That is, well, I mean, and I think Corbin wouldn't have cared, but I care, and I'm a student of Corbin, because that you see that bridges the gap between the engineers and the artists in the most lovely way, using analogies and correspondences, which, all right, fine, they're mathematicizable. Others perhaps are not, but there's a really sweet set of examples. And that whole book has got stuff in it that's just unbelievable.
But I am with you. Sound is very penetrant. Smell is very penetrant as well. It can change your frame of mind quickly, suddenly. The memory of a smell brings you back into another way of being in the world, to allude to Heidegger, another way of being in the world. I have that with the sound of rain, when there is no gutter. So the sound of rain hitting the ground without being channeled through a gutter. I find
Tarkovsky's films.
Oh, Tarkovsky's films, exactly. Well, bullseye.
Bullseye. Yeah, you bet.
The way he deals with sound. Another sound I find magical for some reason. It's the sound of a rotating fan at night.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
But it sort of transports me to childhood, because I was born in Rio, in Brazil, a very hot place.
I didn't know that. Okay.
I don't think I could survive there as an adult, but I haven't been there in 30 years. But when I was a kid, I remember suffering a lot to sleep because it was very hot and I couldn't deal with it. So my mother would put a big rotating fan almost next to me. And then I would just lie down there, feeling bad because it's hot, and following the sound of the fan. It goes, and it was hypnotic. So
Yeah.
if I turn on a rotating fan today, it's like I'm right. I'm back there. Um, um, yeah, there are triggers in the world, Tom.
Yeah.
If we pay attention to
Resonances.
them,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, there are keys amongst the icons.
I don't know whether we want to talk about this or not, but I didn't realize that you were born in Brazil. And Brazil figures large in the last few years of my life, but it comes around because you were saying earlier that how do I how do I get to a place where these visionaries are? And you said, well, you'd done psychedelics when you were in your 30s or whatever, but that you had a very hard head and
Yeah,
that you had to take massive doses. And we have some interesting commonalities there. I never did when I was young
me
take any
neither.
psychedelics. I didn't take any until I was 69, I think, or maybe 70, because I thought, well, it's about time I should try. So I took a big handful of dried mushrooms and I got Grateful Dead posters, but that was about it. You know, it was just wasn't very transformative. And then I have a now very good friend in Brazil who was taking my online classes. He didn't say this to me at the beginning, but after the fact, he said, yeah, you were up there talking in class about the imaginal world, and I knew you didn't know what you were talking about. So so you got it. So he invited me down to do iboga in Brazil. With it's a Gabonese indigenous Gabonese religion
Yeah, it's from
with a
Africa.
yeah, and there's a small group of people in Brazil from Gabon and elsewhere who run these. And I looked it up and I discovered that Iboga had a reputation for being a really big
Yeah,
hammer, you know.
yeah.
And I said, I've got a very hard head, and I think it would take a great deal to make a difference for me. So sure, I'll go down there. It's a very long story, but the short version is I've done it 3 times now, and I'm going to do it a fourth for sure. And it provided me it provided me with the kind of um, massively disruptive psychic experience that turns out to have, I mean, it turns out to fit very neatly, I think, with this whole process I've been trying to go through all these years. Um, but I do think it had to be it had to be a big drug.
I wouldn't. Well, I don't have the cojones to do iboga. To be honest with you, because yeah, that's a hammer. It's 2 days long.
Yeah, oh
It's
yeah, oh
it's
yeah,
highly dissociative. It's deliriant almost.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I
yeah.
I
It was incredibly miserable. All 3 times, the worst experiences I've ever had in my life, and I'm going back again.
because in Brazil I know they do ayahuasca. I've never
Yeah,
done it,
yeah, me either.
but it's not as bad. I mean, you don't have to commit 2 days, and it's like 4 to 8 hours.
Yeah,
And
no,
and,
this
and if
was this was 4 days, two nights with the plant medicine, but a 4-day process, which is pretty short. In Gabon, it's longer. If you go to Gabon, it's a poof. I don't think I could do that. But in any case, you know, I'm I think that the nature of the experiences which I've had so far indicated 2 things to me. One, that I was right. I needed a really big hammer because I had lots of resistances at every possible level. But then in the end, um, it's not such a big deal in the sense that I guess Corbin and all this other stuff prepared me to be not shocked. I mean, Corbin probably would have said, no, 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 you don't, that's a mistake. And Ibn Arabi, I don't, who knows? He didn't need it, that's
Yeah.
for sure. And would he have been skeptical? Who knows? I don't know. But at least for a post-enlightenment rationalist like me, it definitely opens it opens the doors of perception just a crack, and maybe a little more eventually. But I don't see any I don't see any reason to the ontology and the epistemology just I don't even want to go there.
For me, what it did, I mean, I'm very skeptical of psychedelic gnosis, people who come back from a trip and say, oh, I talked to the aliens in the Pleiades and they are sending me heart vibrations. And well, I that's not what it does for me. What it did for me is almost the inverted version of it, but it leads to the same place, which is I have had ultimately some extremely intense experiences with the psilocybin, which is legal where I live. So, I went to my doctor before I ever did it. I checked my liver, my heart. I read the papers. It's legal, so you can go through the entire process in a safe way. And I increased my dose slowly, doing controls and all that. And eventually, I was comfortable enough to do a very high dose trip, and I did it a couple of times. And what it did to me was the following. You, of course, land in a very different realm of the mind, which is incommensurable with this. Your categories don't apply, the distinctions that we make, like self and world, past and future, it just disappears. All of your categories are gone. There is no time as such, no space as such, no distinction between fantasy and world, and it's different. And it comes accompanied with an extremely strong sense of hyperreality, that sense that what you're experiencing at that moment is more real than this right now. It makes the ordinary consensus world feel like something very tenuous, precarious almost, shallow and not very dense at all. It's like a phantasm. And that is much more real. That is much more concrete. You have this sense of hyper reality. And then you come back, you're sober again, and you have to sort of integrate that experience. And what that did to me is not that I started believing that I was physically in the Pleiades talking to aliens. What it did to me was the following. My mind can engender the sense of reality in and of itself. So that trip was imagination. But my mind engendered a sense of hyperreality, even though I know that it was imagination, because if you were next to me, you would see my body right there lying on my bed. You know what I mean? I didn't go anywhere. I just entered a mental realm. Yet it felt very objectively real, very out there. So having convinced myself to my own satisfaction, in view of the evidence, that the mind can do that, it can engender the sense of reality. What about right now?
That's exactly
That's what it did to me.
Yeah.
I started questioning whether there is anything beyond what mind is doing, because it can engender that the unambiguous sense of objective reality. That's what it did to me. So my psychedelic gnosis was reversed, so to say.
Yeah, no, that's what Hillman means by even literalizing is a mode of imagining. Bingo, there you go. You had that experience, which is, I mean, actually, that's I don't I my experiences were nothing like that, and it would take a long time to explain, but they were. I feel as if I have to do it several more times before
Don't you want to
People could
try ayahuasca or psilocybin? Very
I mean,
different.
I did the psilocybin, and now I feel like I'm committed to,
Boga.
yeah, this is my medicine, for better or worse, and that just feels right to me, and I went to do it with no particular expectations except that I'm old and I should do some psychedelics before I die. But I take forever to talk about that stuff. But if the only thing that happened was an analog of your experience, that would be perfect. You know, and because in the end, what going back to reading Hillman the first time, I have I have a student that I taught Hillman. I've taught Hillman a few times, but many years ago when I was just first reading Hillman, I did a little class, and it was all women because we were at a little women's college in Pennsylvania, and we hit on something in one of his books, and she just slapped her hands down on the table and said, "Oh my God, you mean you can think that?" um, and it's that sense that, oh, just the sudden release that the windows open and the walls fall down, and you don't have any content necessarily. It's just, oh, the world just became a much bigger place, and I'm addicted to that.
What I find amazing, Tom, yeah, I mean, that book, well, the book's on Corbin, but All the World and Icon takes the cake as far as I'm concerned. It is an inspired book throughout. Every paragraph is like it's intense. You can't let it down. A book that came from somewhere, in some sense, identified with you. A book like that can only possibly mean that something in there, looking behind your eyes, knows this stuff, experiences this stuff, lives in these places that you're talking about and trying to visit from a more egoic perspective. There is something in you that is very fluent in all this. It's not only Corbin, it's not only Bin Arabi, it's you. It's you who weaved that book.
But it's not me, but I take your
Yeah,
point.
okay. It's just through you, whatever.
Yeah.
There is something very intimate that you have, that you're in contact with, if you don't want to identify with it. But it's very, very, by acquaintance, direct acquaintance, something right there that knows this stuff. And you're trying to re-encounter it in another way, right?
Yeah. Within the last several years, I mean, I've been told that. I mean, people have said that because I'm often very unsure of myself, because the Tom in me, it doesn't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on, but something is going on. And as you were saying earlier, when you get older, you just get to the point where you just don't care, and whatever happens happens.
Yeah.
And I mean, is this worth saying out loud? But yeah, because so I read all those books, and then I thought, because it seemed like I should write poetry, right? Because that would be like a good next step. Robert Zavins, the guy who wrote about Hillman and Jung and Corbin. I tried to get in touch with him once, and he was Latvian, and he says, no, I don't do that anymore. I write poetry mostly in Latvian, and I thought, okay, yeah. He's was a great scholar of Corbin and Jung and Hillman. He wrote a book called Imagination is Reality, and a few others. It was really, really good, really important. Anyway, I thought, oh, the obvious thing would be to write poetry. And so I sat and I wrote some poetry, and I got it published. And then I thought, oh, great, I'll write some more poetry. And it was gone.
Yeah.
It was just, it had, so I think this is important somehow. It is to me, but maybe other people will be interested. I sat down to write poems, and at one point I thought, oh, it's become a formula. I, and that was it. I had done it for like, I don't know, 6 months, and I was told they were good. I don't know. And then they stopped coming. And so I think the take home message from that and a bunch of other things is that you really have to learn to pay the right kind of attention to what's going on in your life. And boy, I don't know what that consists in. Hillman says in the piece, I think it's the Thought of the Heart piece, he says Plotinus thought that living could become a kind of self-steering process where you knew when you were going off wrong. And for Plotinus, apparently, it was about beauty. Not sure that works for me,
Yeah, for me
but
also.
the sense that that's not right, and I don't know how one relaxes into that. But you were speaking in very similar terms a while
Yeah,
ago.
yeah. It took many years for me to even identify what I call the movement of the impersonal within me.
Oh, that's
Um,
good. That's real good.
because it's not like there is a disembodied voice speaking in my mind. That's not how it works. You think the thoughts yourself. You only know the impersonal by experiencing the impersonal from a first person perspective. So how do you know it's not you, right? How do you know it's something else? It took me many, many years to sort of refine my sensitivity to identify what in me is just me and what in me is just nature, because nature is impersonal. We are part of nature, right? Of course, the impersonal flows within us. How could it be otherwise? But today, I don't want to get cocky with age, because I know the pitfalls are many and the minds in the field are well hidden. But I'm less anxious about being able to identify the dynamics. I'm more relaxed now. Maybe I have this false sense that I figured at least a little bit. I know what is in me, what in me is me, and what in me is not. There are some telltale signs, and some of it is physical with me. I tend to feel it here,
Mm,
here in my upper
mm,
chest, and
mm,
uh, and
Oh, yeah. No, that's really super helpful. But then I have a question. The reason it's helpful is because in those very rare moments when what you're calling the impersonal, and that I relax into it, my voice drops an octave, boom. And my voice comes from much lower in my body. And it'll happen, and it embarrasses me because I think, ooh, there's the real me, and I never am that. And now I'm going to do this again. But here, I have a question. So you talk about the the presence of nature in you and the impersonal. So for Corbin and for the Bwiti religion from Gabon, what you're looking for or hoping to come in contact with is your angel. And the angel is not, certainly for Corbin, the angel is not impersonal. Um, the angel is supra personal. And it's only, the divine twin thing. And he's got yeah. So it's your heavenly twin. Um, and I think uh, that okay, back up a second. In Kaya Silverman's book, Flesh of My Flesh, one of the best parts of that book is her discussion of Lou Andres Salome and Rilke. And I didn't know about Luandria Salome, and she was something else.
Force of nature. Yeah.
And so I can't quite quote it, although I should be able to because I use it all the time in class. In a letter to Rilke, she said that when the two of them came together, it wasn't two halves seeking a whole. It was a kind of primordial kinship. And rather than two halves, each of which needed the other, what happened was the surprised awakening of a whole. It wasn't the two halves, it was the surprised awakening of a
Yeah.
third thing. And this intimacy extended, she says, even into the dusts of the cosmos. So this sounds to me like an analog for Corbin's account of the union between the angel and the human person, though in this case it's two humans, but they were both fairly intense
Yeah.
humans, you know.
Yeah. Both.
And what I read in Salome and maybe in Corbin too is that supreme personhood is completely impersonal, but it's individual and individuating in something like Jung's sense.
I only had that feeling during a psychedelic trip. Then normally I stick to the Western philosophical tradition and I call it the daimon. Like Socrates had his daimon. And the daimon has been with philosophers forever. And it's a label for the impersonal within, which, given our cultural mindset today, it's something you can say and defend. You just say, well, we didn't parachute in here. We were created within nature. We are made of nature. Of course, there is something impersonal within us, right? How could it be otherwise, right? But of course, my own experience of it may not be as analytic and easy to defend. During a psychedelic trip, I experienced the daimon as, when I came back, I wrote it down. I used the words wingman. It's like you're a fighter pilot and, you're going to combat and there is a wingman that is protecting, your six, that while you're trying to hit the target, the wingman is sort of looking out for you. Which goes back to the guardian angel story.
Yeah, that is really good.
I only made the association afterwards because I wrote down my trip report. I wrote down, whoa, there was a wingman. He's always looking out.
There was a wingman. That is fantastic. Yeah.
So yeah, I understand what you mean by supra-personal. It is not a person, definitely not, and it has an agenda that doesn't give a damn whether there is food on your plate tomorrow or a roof over your head tonight. It's not dealing in that kind of currency. So you have to look out for yourself in a sense, because it's morally ambiguous. It's like, it's like a tornado. A tornado is morally ambiguous, right? It can kill the criminal, but can also kill the victim. But during the psychedelic trip, it felt much more individuated. I don't want to use personalized. It's not a person, but individuated. There is an agency that is not the whole universe. It is in some sense separate, or not completely separate, but it's identifiable. There are boundaries. That was the experience during the trip. But the moment I land back in my ordinary state of consciousness, I again experience it as non-individuated. Yeah, no, like I can't go that far because it does have an agenda. It has a teleological arch that it's sort of riding. So I cannot say that it's totally not individuated. I cannot say that. It's individuated in some sense, in the sense that whatever nature is trying to do through me, it's not necessarily the same as what nature is trying to do through you.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Okay.
No, this differentiated.
Differentiated. Um, yeah, this is really helpful because to me personally, um, because I'll be teaching Corbin again starting next week, and so everything will be new, and I have had for a long time. I mean, since the very beginning, this sort of ambivalence about Corbin and his angels, and one of the obvious reasons for that ambivalence is the history of the notion of angels in the West, which, I mean, Corbin says somewhere in one of his late writings, he says, "Oh, the angels in Rilke's elegies. That's what I mean." He says, "Précisément, that's exactly what I mean." And it's a pretty terrifying figure. Maybe it has some of this. The point I'm trying to make is that talking about the impersonality of your wingman, that's really useful because in talking about angels, people always say, "Well, what does he mean by angels?" And my definitions are usually inadequate because um, I think they lack the element of impersonality in my description. And you could get that from Jung. I mean, who knows about Ibn Arabi? But I think that, but the the Rilke connection, because what we white male Europeans mean by person, that's been,
Yeah.
that's just not good for all sorts
Yeah,
of
yeah.
reasons. And it's really hard to use, modern English. I was talking to somebody the other day and I asked, what's a good way to get outside of Western consciousness? And he said, "Don't speak English," which is, which isn't, well, that my historian, mentor who was fluent in ancient Greek, he said absolutely the same thing. You can't think like an ancient Greek unless you use their language. And I'm functionally monolingual. I know a little bit of French, and you can only do so much if you're stuck with these ridiculous words, and I
Yeah.
constantly run up against that.
You were talking about Rilke. There is a letter. I'm not sure whether it's in Letters to a Young Poet or another letter. And I don't remember the time period either. But in one of his letters, Rilke talks of the impersonal or the suprapersonal in terms of a melody. I don't know whether you remember that. He says, he writes the letter and he says, "What I'm going to tell you now rivals in significance a religion." That's Rilke saying that. That's what he's about to convey rivals a religion in significance. And then he says, I'm going to paraphrase, I can't remember exactly, but he says, if you find the underlying melody of your life, very Schopenhauerian, the
Very
rhythm,
Corbinian.
rhyme, and flow, if you find the underlying melody of your life, uh, then you can bear anything, because
Mm.
the struggle for deciding, finding direction, what you have to do and what it's all about, all that struggle disappears. You just ride the melody of your life, the flow, the ebb and flow of the suprapersonal or the impersonal. And it comes across so, I mean, Rilke and his skill with words, everything is like vibrant and alive when you read him. It's like there isn't a single word that is not necessary, right? Everything is the crisp and saturated colors. That's the feeling I have reading Rilke. Saturated, crisp colors, very high 4K definition. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I remember this passage because it struck me so deeply as a Schopenhauerian myself, that he
Yeah.
speaks of the impersonal as the melody that underlies your life. I thought that was fantastic.
Since you bring up Schopenhauer again, about whom I know virtually nothing, life is too short. Um, Could you just articulate again what you said about, if I heard it right, that for Schopenhauer, the material world was a manifestation of will?
Yeah,
Could you
yeah,
talk about that?
yeah, sure. In Schopenhauer, no, he was born in the late 18th century. So he was a young man when Kant was the authority figure in Europe because of his book about absolute idealism, which is epistemic idealism. And he says Kant was correct in saying that the contents of perception, the phenomena, are merely the appearance of the thing in itself. It's the way the thing in itself presents itself to us. And because of that, it's a sort of it's a cooperation between two parties, the perceived and the perceiver. So the noumenal, the thing that underlies the phenomenal, the thing in itself, can never be discerned because we can only relate to it through the intermediation of the phenomenal, through the intermediation of perception, the appearances, so to say, Kant's appearances. And Kant went further and said, therefore, it's impossible to know the noumenal. And Schopenhauer came around and said, that is almost correct, because there is only one exception to this. We cannot know what is not us except through the intermediation of the phenomenal, through the intermediation of appearances, how what is not us appears to us. But we are ourselves. We are also part of the world. We also exist. Therefore, there is the noumenal in us. We are noumenal. And to experience something that I can point to and say, that's myself, I don't need a mirror. I don't need even my senses. I don't need eyes. I don't need nose. I don't need ears. Even if I am in a perfect sensory deprivation chamber, he didn't use this analogy. It's my own now. Even if you're in a perfect sensory deprivation chamber, you still experience your endogenous mental states. You experience your thoughts, you experience your emotions, you experience your intuitions. There is something it is like to be you, even when you are not perceiving anything, let alone yourself. And for Schopenhauer, that was the noumenal, endogenous experiential states were the noumenal. And he described it as der Wille, the will, because it's the canonical example of an endogenous experiential state. You will, regardless of perception, right? And fear is an example of will as well. Love is an example of will. When perception falls away, there is still something it is like to be you, and that is the will in you. And then he proceeds and he says, what does the will in me look like when it is represented? Well, it looks like my body, right? If I'm feeling sad, it looks like tears flowing down my face, and my face is very material. The tears are very material. So the will in me appears as matter, the matter of my body. And by the way, my body is made of the same kind of matter that makes the rest of the universe. In modern language, you would say the same atoms and force fields. In Schopenhauer's time, he used the word mass. Corporeal mass is the same mass that constitutes the rest of the universe. Therefore, the rest of the universe too is the will represented as matter. Otherwise, you have to postulate a completely arbitrary discontinuity in nature. If the matter that constitutes my body is the representation of the will, then the matter that constitutes the whole of the universe is the representation of the will. In your language, all the world an icon because representations are the icons. They point to the thing represented. Barfield said in Saving the Appearances, you're probably familiar with that book, right? That we have this old intuition that behind the representations, there is something that is akin to us in substance. In other words, it's also mental. And then Schopenhauer said, therefore, everything is will. And the will in me is a segment of the will of nature. So that's Schopenhauerian idealism. Because he says everything as it is in itself are endogenous experiential states. And matter is what those endogenous experiential states look like when they are observed from the outside, when they externally represent it. And it is analytically coherent. Of course, he writes, and Schopenhauer's writing style is wonderful, because if you compare his style with his contemporary Hegel, it's water to wine.
Okay. Yeah, no, yeah, I suffered through the phenomenology of
Hegel.
spirit.
The
I
phenomenology
never did
of a spirit.
Yeah. We spent, I spent, a long time.
No, Schopenhauer, he writes as if he were standing in front of you, talking to you. And he repeats himself like we repeat ourselves in verbal conversation. So it's wonderful because, it's two thick volumes, The World as Will and Representation. And he says the same thing again and again and again in multiple different ways. And it takes a very intelligent scholar to misinterpret him. Because it's very obvious. What are you saying? And then lo and behold, the greatest authority, so-called greatest authority in Schopenhauer today, English professor called Christopher Janway, he didn't even begin to understand Schopenhauer. It takes a very sharp intellect to not understand the man.
I'll keep that in mind. I'm too old to embark on Schopenhauer.
You will love it.
Yeah, I might, but there's millions of other things I would also love.
That's the problem.
But
I recognize the problem.
No, we did Kant and Hegel. We did the Critique of Pure Reason, and we did the Phenomenology. And the old Bailey translation. God, that was so impossible.
No, it's totally impossible. It starts with the title. If you ask me, the title is mistranslated.
Well, because, So what in Bailey it was the phenomenology of mind. I think there's a new one, but it's phenomenology of spirit, which is better.
Maybe I'm mistaking the translations, but I think the better translation is the phenomenology of mind. Because in German, Geist means mind, but it also means soul and spirit.
Okay.
And if you look at the context in which he's using the word, he's not using the word in a supernatural sense. So if you ask me, it's the phenomenology of mind. It's just that the mind is the mind of the absolute, which is that which manifests itself in history through the dialectics.
So I mean, this is probably not a good place to delve deeply into an explanation of Schopenhauer, but maybe this is useful for somebody. You lost me in your discussion of Schopenhauer when we were in the sensory deprivation tank.
That's my own thing. Don't blame Schopenhauer for that.
I won't blame Schopenhauer for that, but I think I've been so poisoned by a particular reading of Descartes that when I'm in the sensory deprivation tank, there's nothing there. So there's no will. I mean, there's no me. I'm just gone.
Don't you feel bored? So if imagine you are in a sensory deprivation chamber, wouldn't you feel maybe bored? Wouldn't you feel anxious? Wouldn't you will something? Wouldn't you wish for a vision? Wouldn't you fear another vision?
Yeah, but where does all that stuff come from? It comes from the sensations that I had before I got in the tank. Does that not matter?
Is that so? Some people start to hallucinate in a sensory deprivation.
There you go. Okay, there you go. Then now I'm fine because now you got a world of icons.
Oh, I see. No, of course. Yes, you have that emphasis.
So if I started to hallucinate, I'd be home. That's fine. But I don't. But we don't really want to.
There are people. This I can say with some authority because I am one of them. There are people who they will hallucinate feelings. In other words, the same way you produce imagery through the imagination, you will produce feelings. You produce anxiety. You produce intuitions. Things that have no form, but there is something it is like to experience them.
Yeah. Okay.
So, for instance, I just gave you an example earlier today without knowing the feeling of ultra reality. It has no form, but it's still imagined. It's endogenous. It rises out of me. It doesn't come from the world around me. So it's a non-Heideggerian emphasis. It's like there is a you that is not codified by the world. That's the idea.
But who's the you? I mean, you have the feelings. No, I mean, this is actually super interesting and important to me. Oh, I don't. What is wrong with us? Who cares about this shit? But look, uh, so in that, let's stick with that example. And I've never been in one, so this is so I am totally out of my depth, and I am hallucinating. I'm hallucinating what it would be like to be in a sensory deprivation tank. And how would you tell the difference between a hallucinated sensation and a hallucinated feeling? Would there be a difference?
Yeah, one has no form.
Which one?
The feeling has no form. You couldn't draw
the
it.
sensation. What if I felt that my fingers were tingling?
That would still have a spatial distribution that you would say it's tingling here, it's going up to here.
Oh yeah, I guess it would, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's my pointing finger, or it's my thumb, and is it on the left or the right, and how big an area of tingling it is. Does it go all the way into the hand? Does it stay, in by the knuckles? There is a spatiality and extension to it.
All right.
But when you have an endogenous feeling or an endogenous emotion, extension cannot even begin to describe it. It's incommensurable with extension.
But don't you have it in your chest when you have?
You can. Yeah, sometimes. So my feeling of the impersonal is localized.
Yeah.
But I can definitely, for instance, if certain ink can pin down. The certain emotions I cannot pin down. Anger I can pin down, but there are subtle states of mind that no, I cannot spatially locate it. It's incommensurable. It's like it's not relatable to spatiality.
See, what I've been arguing to myself and maybe others is that emotions are always, see, I wouldn't want to overstate it, but they have bodily reference. They're they're not abstract. They're embodied. It's hard for me to.
That's a phenomenologist. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean just a person. No. I mean, I mean, emotions are not abstract. I mean, if I think of an isosceles triangle, I don't know that actually has a location. But if I feel anxious, and maybe that's a good choice. I mean, it's hard. Could you be anxious if you weren't embodied?
What is the length in centimeters of a thought, a mathematical thought?
No, it's way too abstract. That's an engineer. Put the engineer aside. We did not invite him.
But you're asking me to name a mental content that is not locatable in space or not describable through extension. So it by necessity, it is an abstraction. I'll give you an example.
Wrong. That can't be right. That can't be right. What do you mean?
I'll give you an example.
Okay, give me an example.
Do you know Euler's equation? Do you know what it is? It relates.
I used to. Which one is it?
It relates pi, the natural logarithm, and the imaginary number.
Okay. Oh, Jesus. Yes, it's been a long time. I love imaginary numbers.
It is the most beautiful and unbelievable equation in the whole of mathematics. And when you look at it for the first time, you think, this is art. This cannot be true. And then you can go through proof. And when you go through the proof, you understand why it must be true. That understanding, there is nothing embodied about it. It's not here. It's in a parallel existence, which has no extension. It's a web of semantic interconnects. It's like, I call it the crystal of eternity. It's a web of meanings. It has no extension. It's anything but embodied. Yeah, but we don't need to be that abstract. Sometimes, for instance, the feeling of boredom, I can't locate it in my body. If I'm in a sensory deprivation chamber and I'm lying there and I'm like, has it been long enough? There are so many other things to do. And that feeling of boredom, I can't locate it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure this is the argument I should make, but if you were hooked up to if you had your brain hooked up, they could look at the little squiggles and say, "Oh, he's bored now."
That's an abstraction. That's an abstraction, and I agree with you. There is this correlation, but we don't experience that correlation. You don't experience your neurons. You don't experience activations in your Broca's area or the.
Yeah. All right. It was a bad example. Okay, but I think you got me with Euler's equation, except the way I get around. I hate the idea of anything being abstract. I don't think we can experience abstraction.
You're talking to an engineer and somebody who worked at CERN.
I know, and
I'll tell you this, Tom. When I understood why Euler's equation is true, when I understood why it must be true by necessity, I cried.
My point exactly. That's my point exactly. That's the point I want to make.
But it was an endogenous experiential state that I couldn't locate in my body. It might as well be in the galaxy of Andromeda.
Locate it. Well, it was.
It was everywhere. If I have to locate it, I would tell you it's smeared across the entirety of space-time.
Yeah, I like that. Like Lou Andreas Salome's to the dusts of the universe. I mean, it's that same movement of universality.
But strictly speaking, something that is everywhere is nowhere.
Something wrong with that, because see, what I'm trying to do is take the material world and suck it all up.
No,
in such a way that this infinite network, what's like Indra's net, I'm told, this infinite network of correspondences has there's no place where it gets cut off and there's abstraction up there. It's all one huge thing. So no abstract, or if there is abstraction, then there has to be materialism, which I ain't having.
There is a phenomenologist, Merleau-Ponty. I think he had a similar position, like all experience has to be embodied.
Yeah, I mean, but embodied in the broadest possible sense. Embodied in a sense where they're not really bodies.
even if it is embodied in that sense, it may not be perceptual. In other words, you can.
That's good. That's good.
That's all you need.
That's good.
For Schopenhauer, that's all you need, because representations are perceptual contents, and the will is not a perceptual content. But in your definition of embodiment, the will could still be embodied, because the only thing it denies is that it is a perceptual content. In other words, the will is not something you see or taste or smell or hear or touch. It's something else, but it may have the qualities of embodiment so long as it's not a sensory content. Okay. Not directly a sensory content. You may, by analogy, relate it to sensory content. So that's Schopenhauer's point. The will is endogenous. In other words, you don't need sensory organs to experience it, or even to define it, talk about it.
Okay. And you don't need sensory. Oh boy, I was going to try to agree with you by saying that you don't need sensory organs to produce Euler's equation, but boy, I don't know. I just, yeah, this is,
The feeling I had when I understood why Euler's equation not only is, but must be true, that feeling had nothing to do with my senses. It was not something I saw or smelled or touched or tasted. No,
that's true. But what was it that got you so excited that you cried? What was it about the beauty of it that made you cry? Because I have, in my own tiny little way, I had a similar kind of experience reading Feynman's lectures on physics. I can't get very far in that because I never got that. But his one of those really early chapters is called Algebra. And although I didn't break into tears, when I got to the end of that, I just thought, oh my God, that was why I wanted to be a physicist. It was like, oh my God, this is so wonderful. Or the first time you realize what you can do with iterations of the logistics equation. It's
I can relate to that.
but it's so physical. I mean, I don't quite.
If you, my first job was at CERN, the physics lab in Switzerland, and I was 22. I just graduated on a Friday, and on Monday I was there. At that age, I thought that there is a physical theory called supersymmetry. We call it Susie. Desperately looking for Susie. When I was young, I thought Susie was so beautiful because, there's nothing spatial about it. It's just a mathematical symmetry in the standard model. It postulates that there are symmetrical superparticles for everything. And in a certain abstract space, it is entirely symmetrical and it's beautiful, but that abstract space is not space, it's not space-time.
No, but it's space.
It's abstract. It's mathematical.
Abstract just means we can't live in it. Oh God,
it's a
you're
symmetry.
making my life so difficult.
Wait. I'll get there. It's a symmetry of semantics. It's a symmetry of meanings.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. But what's the meaning?
Yeah, connotations, denotations.
Yeah, it's part of that web.
Yeah.
Okay. As long as, okay, you're out. See, here's all I need. You're out here with Susie and Euler, and in what you're calling abstract space, and there has to be a series of connected analogies that bring you back into my heart.
The physicist's exercise is precisely the opposite.
Yeah, I know, but I want to be able to get back.
Yeah, I don't know how you do that, but I can tell you that I experienced supersymmetry as something that was so beautiful that it absolutely had to be true. Mm-hmm. And then when the results of the experiment came out in 2012, I was no longer at CERN. And the result was it's not there, at least not at the energy levels we can reach or will ever be able to reach under economically feasible conditions. And I was crushed by that.
Yeah.
And for me, Euler's equation is the survival of that disappointment. You know, I lost Susie, but I at least have Euler. You know what I mean? That one is true, regardless of experiment. I don't. How can I explain this to you? Yeah, I can't explain it. All I can bear witness to is that it is not locatable.
Okay.
It's concrete. It's very, very intimately felt. It's very real, very substantial. Mm-hmm. It's not airy.
Oh, okay.
Spiritual.
See, maybe what I'm arguing about is a misunderstanding on my part of what you mean by abstract.
Yeah, I don't mean spiritual in Hillman's sense. I don't
know what abstract could even mean. I don't think anything abstract exists. This is a linguistic problem that I'm having.
When I say abstract, what I mean is not something that can be described through extension, through meters and seconds.
Oh, well, shit, that's almost all of reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is something that is not that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Almost
bearing witness
everything
to.
is. Yeah. Well, and that was Newton's problem in the little story that I made up. He got tired of dealing with things that couldn't be measured in extensions. But of course, that's bad because it became physics and then it goes all to hell. But
to a scientist, this stuff you're alluding to right now is abstract, but not abstract in the way you use the word.
Yeah. Yeah.
I understand that. So yeah, we had a linguistic disconnect here.
Okay.
Endogenous experiential states can be very in your face. There is nothing airy or subtle about them.
Yeah.
They're right there, in your nose,
Yeah, and so this is crazy. I don't know if I really mean this. So you head up into the heavens with Swedenborg and Corbin, and then when you meet Euler's equation, everybody looks at it. Everybody says, "Oh my God, that's beautiful," because it's right in your face.
If you understand why it's necessarily true, if you just look at the equation and somebody tells you it's true and you believe it, then it's abstract in your sense. If you believe Euler's equation because an authority told you it's true, or you followed the proof once, but you forgot it.
See, I'm confused, and I tell this story a lot. Oops, what is it? It's 3:00.
I have to. I also have to leave soon. I had to leave 8 minutes ago.
Yeah, me too. Okay, we'll have to do this another time because I need to talk to you about.
No, I cannot leave now. Now I have to hear your thoughts.
No, I was so I don't know if this is a true story or not, but I pretended it is, and I tell it as if it were. The Indian mathematician Ramanujan, did I get his name right? I mean, he could just give you a 50-digit number and say, "Oh yeah, I know that number," and he was. In my lingo, that was a personified experience of the nature of that number. He
could give you equations that he knew were true, but he had no proof for it.
No, that's right. Because, and here's the thing that's probably I shouldn't do, but I do it all the time. When I'm trying to explain to people some vision of the anima mundi in something like Corbin's sense, so that you get his wonderful story from Proclus of the heliotrope, the little flower that's praying to its lord. And so I say to people, look, in this kind of Neoplatonic Corbin world, everything has a little bit of personhood. Because God is the person, and so everything has just a little bit, and I think this is detectable in what I understand of indigenous cultures. Everything's alive. I mean, everything has some personhood, and in response to the siren song of the abstract being what's really real, the theory of everything, I use Ramanujan as an example, saying, see, if you really understand this stuff, everything has some little fragment of what you might want to call personhood. And, I was at the Santa Fe Institute the first year that they had the summer school, and I got to hang out with people who were really good at physics and mathematics. And it was the first time in my life I've ever met anybody like that. So it was really fun. And when they were at the blackboard, they were so excited and they were slinging the chalk around. And I mean, there's nothing abstract about that. And then they'd sit down and they'd show you things and they'd explain it, except for maybe the abstract algebra people. You can't talk to them. But I mean, there was nothing abstract about any of that.
I agree with you. I understand now in what sense you use the word abstract, which I should have known because it comes across from your work. But yes, in that sense, in the sense you use it, I agree with you. Everything that exists is felt. It's not an indirection.
Yes.
Everything that exists can be known by acquaintance.
Yes.
Not through indirection. Yeah, I agree with you. Yes.
Okay,
I'm
great.
Right there with you. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Now I feel confirmed in
No
my
exception,
suspicions.
100%. Everything
Okay.
that is must be knowable by direct acquaintance.
Yeah.
In other words, it's directly felt and not only pointed to.
Okay. Okay. All
The
right.
question is whether all of us can know everything that is knowable. That's a different
No.
story. Right?
Yeah, that's a no, that's a I can't know
Yeah.
Euler's equation the way you know it. Nope, can't do it. I'd like to be able to do it, but I can't. Huh. Well, that
Oh, it's a
was good.
delight.
Now I feel much better.
It's a delight talking to you, Tom.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We'd have to meet in the flesh sometime.